My name is Evelyn Cooper. I'm 35 years old, living in Chicago, and I used to believe that marriage was the place we turn to when we're at our most vulnerable. But I've learned something different. Sometimes the very person sleeping next to you is the one quietly laying the trap, just to see how far you'll fall apart. On Christmas Eve, as the sound of bells echoed through the room, Daniel, my husband, suddenly collapsed in the middle of dinner. He clutched his chest, eyes rolled back, and mumbled, "Call an ambulance." Everyone panicked, scrambling for medicine, dialing emergency numbers. Except me. I stood still. I opened a red envelope and spoke clearly under the stunned gaze of the whole family. Medical report confirms full health. Daniel Cooper has no heart condition. He writhed on the floor. I stepped forward and placed a silver gift box on the dining table, then gently opened it. Inside was a notarized asset agreement. The person who signed it, Daniel, himself, on a night he thought he had everything under control. I didn't fall apart the way he had bet on. I didn't cry. I simply stood up. And this time, I didn't stand alone. Have you ever lived with someone you no longer recognize? Have you ever kept silent not because you were weak but because you were preparing your strike? Leave a comment if you've ever been hurt by someone closest to you. Hit like if you believe women weren't born to stay silent. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to hear the rest of this story because everything is just beginning. I met Daniel in the fall when I was 27. He had just won a major lawsuit, and I had just been promoted to my first project manager role. He came across as confident, sharp, with a way of speaking that made people both respect and want to know more about him. I won't deny it, I admired him then. Daniel knew how to speak in public, how to choose just the right words to make me feel important, special. We got married 2 years later. The wedding took place in a small garden on the outskirts of the city, where sunlight filtered through the leaves, and my mom cried as I walked down the aisle. I used to think it was the start of a beautiful chapter. But some things never show themselves at the beginning. At first, Daniel was still the thoughtful husband. He made coffee early in the morning, ordered my favorite meals every Friday. But after losing his job at the law firm, he wasn't the Daniel I once loved anymore. According to him, he was fired because a jealous new manager couldn't stand his record. He withdrew from social circles, locked himself in the upstairs office, claiming to work all day, though I knew he had no active projects. About 3 months later, I started noticing subtle but clear changes. Every time I laughed too loudly at dinner, Daniel would glance at me and say in a sarcastic tone, "Tone it down, Evelyn, this isn't a bar." When I shared that I had successfully presented a project at work, he sighed, took a sip of wine and mocked, "Congrats. You've outdone yourself. That's real progress." At first I thought he was just hurt, struggling with a bruised ego. I was patient, encouraging, even suggested freelance work, writing a book, or teaching law. But all efforts were met with cold indifference. "You don't get it," he said one rainy evening when I asked if he wanted to go for a walk. "You don't know what it feels like to be pushed out of the game. And here you are, enjoying that manager chair like a little queen." I stood in the doorway of the living room, silent. Because what I knew more than anything at that moment was that I had started choosing my words carefully. The harmless jokes I once shared with him now became reasons for criticism. When I overslept and missed making breakfast, he'd bring it up again and again in endless arguments. Whenever we attended gatherings with friends, Daniel wore a completely different face. He told jokes, held me affectionately, toasted to me in front of others. Everyone praised him as the ideal husband. "Evelyn is so lucky," a coworker once told me at our company's Christmas party. "Your husband's the kind of man who's mature and understanding." I just smiled. Back home, I'd walk into the dressing room, take off my heels, and hear Daniel's voice from downstairs. "That dress you wore. You should have picked a different one. That color made you look like you were trying too hard." I lowered my head to remove my earrings, my hands trembling slightly. His words weren't loud, never yelling. Just tiny needles piercing through skin I once thought strong enough to bear it all. I didn't tell my mom anything. Every time she called, I still said everything was fine, Daniel was working again, and we were still planning to have kids next year. I kept things looking polished, just like how I always handled work. Plans tidy, complete, without a single crack. But inside, the cracks were forming. I stopped posting couple photos online. I avoided get-togethers with friends. My phone calls with my sister became fewer and fewer, because I feared that the moment she asked, "Are you okay?" I'd break down. Every night coming home from work, I stepped into a house that felt like I wasn't allowed to breathe. Some nights, Daniel sat in eerie silence, glued to his computer screen. Other nights he rambled for hours complaining I didn't understand him, that I was ungrateful, not as gentle as I used to be. I started taking notes, not because I had a plan, just because I needed a way to stay sane. I opened a file on my phone, locked it with a private password, and wrote a few lines each day. Today, he said I eat like a third-shift factory worker. I didn't reply. I did the dishes. He watched TV. Another entry. He got mad because I forgot to buy his usual shaving cream. He didn't yell, just threw the empty tube on the floor. I had no evidence of abuse to call for help. But I wasn't myself anymore. And the scariest part was, no one around me noticed. One night, after coming home late from a meeting, I found him sitting in the dark on the couch. No lights on. I flipped the switch. He looked up, eyes red. "Where were you?" "Late meeting." "I texted you. I think you need a reminder. I'm your husband." I froze in the living room, my bag still on my shoulder. Then he smiled, stood up, and patted my shoulder like nothing had happened. "Come on, don't be mad. I just worry, that's all." I nodded. And in that moment, I realized with painful clarity, I wasn't in a marriage anymore. I was on a stage, performing a quiet, obedient supporting role. The question wasn't when everything would fall apart. It was how long I would stay before I lost the ability to recognize myself. I discovered the loans for the first time when I received a strange notice from the bank. They thanked me for signing up for a new credit card with a $20,000 limit. I remember sitting in the car, parked outside the grocery store, keys still in hand, and my heart skipping a beat like someone had slammed the gas then hit the brakes. I hadn't opened any new card. I hadn't filled out any credit application in months. The sense that something was wrong surged up, vague but impossible to ignore. I called the bank right there, and after nearly an hour of verification, the case manager said clearly, "The application lists Evelyn Cooper, correct birth date, correct social security number. The signature is a bit different from the sample, but not enough to reject it." I was speechless. They sent a copy to my email. When I opened it, the signature was chillingly familiar. It was a warped version of my own, like someone had tried to mimic it, with a shaky hand or in a hurry. And there was only one person in the house who had enough information, enough opportunity, and enough motive to do that. Daniel. I didn't say anything that night at dinner. We ate creamy corn soup and toasted bread like usual. Daniel chewed slowly, telling a story about a guy who got struck by lightning 3 times and still survived. He laughed, then tilted his head toward me. "See? Some people are even unluckier than me." I forced a smile, put down my spoon, stood to refill my water, and hid my trembling hand beneath the table. I didn't confront him. Not because I was afraid, but because I wasn't ready yet for the lie I knew was coming. The next morning, I opened my laptop and logged into my credit report. Over the past 8 months, 3 small loans had been opened under my name from 3 different finance companies. Each loan was between $5,000 and $7,000. Not large enough to draw major attention, but just enough to drag my credit score from excellent down to average. I took a deep breath. It felt like walking on thin ice with a canyon waiting underneath. I printed out all the reports, clipped them together into a thick file, and carefully stored it in the locked cabinet under the staircase, the same cabinet I used to keep old, unused things. Now, it had become a vault of evidence for something I wasn't ready to name yet: fraud. Daniel had been acting weaker by the day. He groaned whenever he bent over, rubbed his chest constantly, and complained about shortness of breath and dizziness. One time I offered to take him in for a full checkup. He nodded reluctantly but agreed. I booked an appointment at a clinic about 20 minutes from our house. That morning, I woke up early and packed some light snacks to bring with us. When I came downstairs, he was already sitting at the kitchen table, still in pajamas, holding a cup of coffee, his expression blank. Are you ready? The car's waiting outside, I said gently. Daniel placed the cup on the table without looking at me. I'm not going. I paused. Why not? I don't like the way you're treating me. Like I'm making this up just to get attention. His voice was sharp. You think I'm faking an illness? To get out of chores. You think I'm that pathetic? I didn't say anything. I just stood there, gripping the handle of my bag, feeling a cold tightness spreading through my chest. The fury in his eyes didn't look like a man hurt from being doubted. It looked like someone who'd been caught, now lashing out to regain control. You act like you know everything. But you don't know anything. Daniel stood up abruptly. I'm not some child you can drag to the doctor. I slowly set the bag down on the table. Do you want me to cancel the appointment then? Cancel whatever. I don't need a doctor. I need a wife who trusts her husband. I turned around and walked upstairs. Each step felt like dragging a boulder. When I shut the bedroom door, I leaned my forehead against the wood, listening to his footsteps going back to the living room, followed by the sound of the TV turning on. Some kind of game show echoed through the wooden floors. I didn't cancel the appointment. I called the clinic and changed the appointment to be for myself. When the nurse asked why, I lied and said it was for a routine check. But the truth was, I needed to know if I was still okay physically, mentally. I'd been living under a kind of pressure no one could see. A slow, invisible exhaustion with no clear symptoms. The following week, I met with Maggie, my best friend from college, now working as a resident at a private clinic. I didn't tell her everything. I just asked, Maggie, if someone was faking an illness to avoid responsibilities, is there any way to prove it? She looked at me for a moment, then softly asked, has he ever refused a medical checkup? I nodded. Then all you can do is observe. Be careful. If you have doubts, don't let yourself face them alone. I nodded. Maggie didn't need to ask more. Her eyes said enough. From that day on, I started documenting every symptom Daniel complained about: dates, times, context. I took photos of half-used blister packs, prescriptions where only 1 or 2 pills were gone. I saved everything in a hidden folder on my phone, labeled fog. Because at that point, everything around me truly felt like fog. Thick, suffocating, and hard to see through. And I was quietly feeling my way out. One evening in early October, when the cold wind began sneaking through every gap in the windows and dry leaves scattered across the backyard, Daniel came home looking disheveled. Clutching his chest with one hand and holding a jacket bag in the other. He dropped the bag onto a chair, groaned softly, and looked at me with weary eyes. Don't cook anything greasy tonight. The doctor warned me. High risk of stroke. I put my notebook down and looked up. Which doctor? The clinic on the west side. They just got a new doctor. Young girl but sharp. She looked at my blood results and knew right away. I nodded slightly. Did they send the results over? Daniel winced. No need. I trust them. Besides, nobody really understands those papers anyway. Just watch what you cook, that's all I ask. I didn't say anything more. I quietly cleared the table, filled the kettle, and watched as he slumped into the sofa, flipping through channels with no real interest. The next morning, while folding his jacket for laundry, I noticed a small piece of paper sticking out from the inner pocket. It was wrinkled, folded in quarters, looked like a medical result. I didn't dig for it. It slipped out when I lifted the jacket. I sat down by the bed and slowly unfolded the sheet. At the bottom, there was a red stamp and a doctor's signature. I read every line carefully. Conclusion: no cardiovascular abnormalities detected. Patient is healthy. No signs of stroke. Risk. I stared at those last words. Clear, certain, impossible to interpret any other way. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but because something inside me had cracked. A part of my mind still wanted to defend him. Maybe the result was outdated. Maybe the doctor made a mistake. But my heart knew better. Daniel had lied. To me. And worse, to our family. I picked up my phone, snapped a photo of the paper, and gently folded it back into the exact spot I'd found it. Then I messaged Maggie. Me. I just found Daniel's test results. Can you take a look for me? Maggie. Send it over. Me. Sent photo. Maggie, after a few minutes. That's legitimate. I know that clinic. They wouldn't put conclusions like that unless they were certain. What are you suspecting? Me. Daniel told everyone he's at high risk of stroke. Maggie. Oh my God. Are you sure he's seen this result? Me. It was in his jacket pocket. No way it's accidental. He knows. Maggie paused before replying again. Maggie. Then this isn't about health anymore, Evelyn. You need to start protecting yourself. I turned off my phone, conflicted. I wasn't exactly angry. Not exactly hurt either. What I felt most clearly was cold. A kind of chill that didn't come from the season, but from realizing that the person who lived beside me for years could craft a story, tell it like gospel, and perform it so perfectly that everyone believed he was gravely ill. That afternoon, I called my mom. Hi Mom, how are you? I'm doing well, sweetheart. How's Daniel? I've still been worried ever since he mentioned the heart condition. I hesitated. He's fine. Nothing serious, Mom. You sure? He seemed pretty clear that day. Said the doctor warned him. Even your dad was worried. I bit my lip. Mom. What if I told you things aren't quite what you think? There was a pause on the other end. What are you saying, Evelyn? I exhaled slowly. I think Daniel is making things up. And not just about his health. My mother's tone shifted. What do you mean? I'll explain later. But if anything happens, just know I no longer believe in what I used to. She didn't say anything else. Only the soft sound of wind from her backyard whispered through the phone line. That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at my own reflection. My face hadn't changed much over the years. But my eyes, they were different. No longer the eyes of someone who tried to understand, tried to forgive, tried to keep the peace. What I saw now was the gaze of a woman who had just woken up inside the very house she once called home. I stepped out and saw Daniel dozing off on the sofa, one arm draped across his eyes, the TV still on. I walked over and gently pulled a blanket over him. Not out of softness, but because I knew this game would take time. And I had to stay in character until the final move was made. I began my counterattack in the quietest way possible. No yelling, no breaking things, no accusations or drama. Because men like Daniel aren't afraid of noise, they're afraid of silence. The silence of a woman who no longer asks why. I met with Maggie on a Tuesday afternoon at a small cafe tucked between two office buildings. We sat at the furthest table in the back, where hardly anyone passed by. She placed a folder in front of me, neatly bound, about 200 pages thick, clipped inside a soft gray cover. You should go through this before handing it to anyone else, Maggie said softly, nudging her black coffee toward me. I couldn't access the National Insurance Database, but I have contacts at 3 major clinics Daniel's visited over the past 6 months. All 3 have medical records under his name. But here's the thing. I opened the folder. 3 different patient names. Same date of birth, same home address. Different names but all pointing to Daniel. One listed as Dan Cooper, another as David C., and the last under Daniel Bryant, all using the exact same social security number. I read without blinking. On each form, he listed different symptoms: chest pain, fatigue, dizziness. But the diagnoses were identical: healthy. No life-threatening issues, no signs of stroke risk like he'd claimed. He's building a narrative, I whispered. Maggie nodded, her expression no longer just that of a friend but a doctor caught between medical ethics and quiet outrage. And one clinic noted he applied for a follow-up visit requesting a certificate for chronic illness. When asked why, Daniel said, to help with claiming insurance support for disability. I looked up at her, my fingers tightening on the edge of the folder. The anger inside me wasn't fire anymore. It had turned to cold steel. Can I use this in court? I asked. You can, but you'll need someone who knows exactly how to guide each step. Maggie paused, then reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. A small ivory rectangle with simple black print. Mark Jennings, family and asset attorney. I referred a client to him last year. She won her divorce against a very wealthy husband. Mark doesn't make noise, but he's solid. I took the card, thanked Maggie, and hugged her tightly. I didn't cry. I had no tears left for disappointment. What I needed now was clarity, and I was about to get it. 3 days later, I sat in Mark Jennings' office, a modest, neatly designed space with the scent of leather and lightly roasted coffee in the air. "Miss Cooper," he said after skimming the current marital asset agreement. "This contract is valid but loose. There are gray clauses. If your husband intentionally misrepresented facts, this could become highly contested." I placed a draft of a revised agreement in front of him. "I want to rewrite the contract to include a clause that protects assets if either party falsifies medical information for personal gain. And I want it to be conditional, only effective if signed voluntarily, with no coercion." Mark nodded thoughtfully. "You're protecting yourself. But for this to hold up, he has to sign it knowingly." "Best if there's a witness." I smiled. "I've already thought of that. And I know exactly how to get him to sign without suspecting a thing." That evening, I made his favorite dinner, beef bourguignon, with toasted garlic butter bread. The lights were dim and warm, soft jazz playing through our old stereo, and a glass of red wine swirling in my hand. Daniel walked down the stairs, surprised but pleased. "What's the occasion?" he asked. "Nothing special," I said with a smile, ladling an extra scoop of meat onto his plate. "You've seemed tired lately." "I just wanted you to feel taken care of." He laughed. "You sound like a character in one of those TV dramas." "Well, tonight I'm playing the role of the good wife," I replied gently. "Actually, there's something I'd like you to look over." I pulled a navy envelope from the drawer and placed it in front of him. "I'm updating some precautionary documents. Just in case something ever happens to either of us, I don't want either side to lose control. It includes a few new clauses: shared assets, medical condition disclosure, and emergency decision rights." Daniel frowned slightly, glanced at the envelope, then flipped through the pages. "I learned this from Uncle Ron's situation, remember? When he was hospitalized, no paperwork in place, the whole family fought. I don't want that for us." I spoke slowly, calmly. My voice steady, my eyes didn't flinch. Daniel skimmed through the stack, then shrugged. "Sure. Makes sense." He signed without hesitation and handed the file back. "As long as it gives you peace of mind." I smiled, slid the papers back into the envelope and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you. I knew I could trust you." I didn't mention that what Daniel had just signed gave up all control over our assets in the event of proven deception. Or that Mark had been standing in the room next door, serving as a hidden legal witness via my internal camera system. I still poured him another glass of wine. Still asked about the movie he was watching. And when he burst out laughing at a silly line, I stayed quiet. Not out of weakness, but because I saw the whole board now. And Daniel didn't know. His move had just been countered. I spent the next 3 weeks carefully rebuilding the image of a devoted wife so flawlessly that no one could question it. I bought his prescribed medications, reminded him when to take each pill like he truly had a fragile heart. I booked regular appointments with the clinic, carefully noting every symptom he described, sitting in waiting rooms for hours, pretending to worry whenever the nurse called his name. I even printed out blood pressure charts, heart rate trackers, and followed the diet plans from the health articles he'd sent me. I read every single one, logged the details, then placed them all into a folder titled Daniel's Care Plan, something I intentionally left in the bottom drawer of my desk, where he'd easily find it. When my mother-in-law called, I told her Daniel was still tired but doing okay, that I was doing everything I could to help him rest properly. She sighed through the phone, saying how lucky Daniel was to have such a good wife. I smiled and thanked her in a soft, humble tone. I knew, in his family's eyes, I was the picture of patience. And I didn't lift a finger to change that. Because now, every word I said, every action I took, became proof that I had tried. That I didn't give up. That I didn't push him away. That if things collapsed, it wasn't because of me. I even suggested we try marriage counseling. Daniel hesitated at first, but after I gently explained that it might help emotionally during this time of weakness, he agreed. I picked a quiet little office in the suburbs, somewhere anonymous. The therapist's name was Carla, in her 50s, with warm eyes and a voice steady like a lighthouse in a storm. During the first session, Daniel was cautious. He told Carla that he'd been feeling lost lately, that his declining health made him short-tempered and suspicious. I sat beside him, hand resting lightly on his leg, nodding quietly, never interrupting. I told Carla that I understood his pressure, and that all I wanted was for both of us to feel safe in this marriage. Carla looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. I see sincerity in you, Evelyn. I also see tension in you, Daniel. But at the very least, the two of you are still sitting here together. That's a starting point. I thanked her. Daniel just sighed. After the third session, Carla pulled me aside in the waiting room, while Daniel went to the restroom. Do you feel afraid, Evelyn? She asked. I looked up at her. Afraid of what? Afraid. Afraid that if you stop trying, everything will fall apart. I stayed silent for a long moment. Then I quietly said, I'm not afraid of that anymore. Carla slowly nodded. I understand. That evening, Daniel seemed lighter. He even laughed in the car, turning to me with a smile. See? I'm cooperating. At least you can't say I'm not trying to change. I smiled, took his hand. Yeah. I can see that. In his eyes, I must have seemed soft again. Gentle. Falling back into the role of the wife he once controlled so easily. That's why he started slipping. One Saturday night, I heard laughter echoing from downstairs while I was folding laundry in the bedroom. Daniel and Kyle, his so-called best friend, the one who always understood him the most, were drinking and watching football in the living room. I headed downstairs with the excuse of bringing out a tray of freshly baked cookies. I didn't say anything. I just stood behind the half-closed door, listening to bits of their conversation drifting through. You know, Kyle said, clearly tipsy, if that heart of yours really stopped beating, Evelyn would get the whole account. And that account isn't small. Daniel chuckled. Don't worry. I've already thought about that. If everything goes according to plan, in a few months, I can pull out at least half before the transfer happens. What are you talking about? I'm setting it up. Using the whole treatment excuse, opening a medical fund. She'll sign it if I do it the right way. You're out of your mind. No. I'm just taking back what should have been mine. Evelyn isn't a saint. She's holding on to all the assets because I trusted her. Now, it's her turn to trust me. I stood still, the tray of cookies cooling in my hands. A faint burnt smell crept from bottom edges, but I couldn't taste anything anymore. I walked back upstairs, revealing no expression. A little while later, Daniel came in, wrapping his arm around my waist with a bright grin. What are you doing? Those cookies smell. Don't let them burn. I turned to him, my gaze soft. Yeah, I'll pay more attention. He kissed me lightly on the forehead, and I pretended to be tired, asking to go to bed early. In the darkness of the bedroom, I pulled out my phone and recorded everything I'd just heard. I logged the date, time, and context. Then I reopened the property agreement he'd signed just days earlier, double-checking the clause about financial transfers without an official medical diagnosis. Everything was still intact. Still well within my reach. And I knew, from that moment forward, Daniel wasn't the only one making plans. I got that email on a Wednesday afternoon, while sitting at my desk pretending to work on a project status report. My mind was still, spinning from the notes I'd taken during our last counseling session. The email subject had just 4 words. About your husband. I hesitated for a second. Part of me wanted to delete it right away, assuming it was harmless spam. But then, I clicked it. Sender, amy.reynolds.1927@gmail.com. Message, Dear Evelyn, I'm sorry if this email comes as a shock or feels inappropriate. I don't even know how to begin. I met Daniel 2 months ago through a dating app. He went by the name Danar, and told me he'd been separated from his wife for a long time, just waiting on final paperwork. I believed him because he sounded genuine, tired, heartbroken, and full of regret about his selfish, cold wife who never understood him. But a week ago, I accidentally found your wedding photo while searching his real name. I realized I'd been lied to, and I think you deserve to know. I don't know if you'll believe me, but I'm attaching our chat history, some screenshots, and a few videos I secretly recorded of him at the hotel, talking about the burden called marriage. I kept them to protect myself. Now I'm sending them to you, because I think you need them more than I do. If you want to meet, I'm open to that. I have nothing to hide. Amy, I read the email twice. There were no signs it was fake. Every word carried a tone I recognized too well: disappointment, confusion, and anger with nowhere to go. I opened the attachments. In the photos, Daniel was sitting next to Amy in a small bar, bathed in soft yellow light. His arm was resting behind her chair, his other hand holding a glass of wine. His face was relaxed, smiling in a way that made me feel oddly disconnected. In one short video, he lay on a hotel bed, shirt unbuttoned, holding the phone in selfie mode and speaking with a tired voice. My wife doesn't get it. She lives in her own world. Rigid, cold, always controlling. I feel like I'm living with a manager, not a wife. I didn't blink. I didn't cry. I wasn't even shocked anymore. There was no dizziness, no crashing waves of disbelief. At this point, it wasn't a blow, it was confirmation. A solid answer to something I had known deep down for far too long. Daniel never saw me as a partner. To him, I was an obstacle, a rival, a shadow to be pushed aside so he could keep living the way he wanted. I replied to the email. Amy, thank you for being brave enough to tell the truth. I believe you. And no, I'm not angry with you. You were deceived just like I once was. If you're willing, I'd like to meet in person. There's something I think I might need your help with. Nothing illegal, I promise. Just a truth that needs to come to light at the right moment. Evelyn, less than an hour later, Amy responded, I'm in. Just tell me where and when I'll be there. We agreed to meet that Saturday afternoon at a small bakery near the lake on the west side of the city. Amy was around, 28, long brown hair, pale blue eyes, and spoke with a kind of sincerity that instantly put me at ease. She didn't hold anything back. She showed me the full message thread between them, over 200 exchanges, ranging from light banter to emotional confession. In one message, Daniel had written, if she died, I don't even know if I'd be that sad. Amy hadn't replied to that text. She told me, something felt off. But I still cared about him, so I stayed quiet. I took her hand. You didn't do anything wrong. He did. And I think you might be able to help me end this in a way that's gentle but undeniable. Amy looked confused. What do you mean? I told her my plan for Christmas Eve. That Daniel had prepared a ridiculous stunt serving me divorce papers like a stage play to humiliate me. That I already had in my possession a legally binding property agreement. And that I needed one final confirmation, from someone who had once been manipulated by him just like I had been. You don't have to say a word, I told her. I'm not asking you to accuse him. I just need you to be there. Silent, but present, so that he knows. I know everything. Amy sat quietly for a long moment. She looked out the bakery window, where the pine garlands had just begun to twinkle with lights for the holiday season. I'll be there, she said firmly. Not for you, but because I need to close this chapter too. I don't want to live forever with the feeling that I was once deceived. I nodded, thanked her. And when we stepped out of the shop, two strangers walked away like teammates who had just made a silent pact for one final match, not to win, but to return truth to its rightful place. That Christmas Eve was colder than usual. The snow wasn't heavy, but the wind cut through every layer of clothing. I remember standing in front of the mirror at 4 in the afternoon, fastening a tiny snowflake-shaped earring, my face oddly calm in the reflection. I thought I might tremble while brushing my hair, or feel a lump in my chest as I slipped on the cream-colored dress Daniel once said was just simple enough not to draw attention. But I felt nothing. No fear. No worry. Just a stillness spreading like a frozen lake. Dinner was hosted at our house, as always. I set the table that morning, prepared roast pork, butternut squash soup, garlic butter rolls, a mixed salad with walnuts and dried cranberries. Everything in the exact traditional menu Daniel's family always insisted on. I simmered red wine with cinnamon and apples on low heat, letting the aroma fill the house. His family arrived on time. His mother, as usual, hugged me tightly and said, "There's our dependable Evelyn again." I smiled and led her inside, not letting a single real emotion show. His father shook my hand, handed me a box of Swiss chocolates, and joked, "Careful, Daniel might eat your share. I laughed, accepted the gift with both hands, and thanked him with a voice as light as air. Everyone gathered around the table adorned with candles and pine wreaths. The warm yellow lights spilled across the white linen tablecloth, making the room look like a Christmas commercial. No one noticed I had replaced all the wine glasses with new ones I needed to be sure that everything on this table carried no trace of the past, only the present. And the truth. Daniel took his usual seat at the head of the table. He wore a burgundy crewneck sweater, the hand-knitted one I gave him 3 years ago. He poured wine, laughed, even told some old jokes that made his cousin a college freshman double over with laughter. I stood up to bring out the roast, just as the doorbell rang. No one at the table noticed I had quietly stepped out through the back door to let Amy in, wearing a beige coat and gray scarf, her face lightly made up, no longer carrying the nervous look she had when we first met. I gave a small nod. She nodded back. No words were needed. I led Amy in through the kitchen entrance and had her wait inside the storage room, a small door that opened into the dining room through a side hallway. I left the door cracked open just enough for her to see the full view of the table, but still stay out of sight from those inside. I returned to the table and sat down across from Daniel. Dinner began. The clink of silverware, the laughter, the clinking of glasses and festive toasts floated around the table just like every year. I raised my glass when needed, smiled at the right moments, nodded in perfect rhythm. In everyone's eyes, I was still the wife Daniel always bragged about, steady, gentle, good at enduring. Until Daniel suddenly dropped his knife and raised a hand to his chest. "Damn it," he muttered, wincing, leaning forward slightly. "My chest. It's tightening." Everyone looked up. His mother set her spoon down, face draining of color. "Daniel." He staggered to his feet, took one step, then collapsed, clutching the edge of the table. "Call an ambulance." The whole table broke into chaos. Someone screamed. His mother rushed to him in panic. His father pulled out his phone and dialed emergency services. A relative shouted to grab the nitroglycerin pills, Daniel's supposed medication. I didn't move. I rose calmly from my seat, walked over to Daniel, now writhing on the floor, his eyes half closed but still darting around. I knelt beside him and said softly, "Don't worry. I have something to help you breathe easier." I pulled a red envelope from my dress pocket. No one understood. I opened it and unfolded a trifolded document. My voice wasn't loud, but every word rang clear. Official medical report from the downtown Chicago clinic dated November 4th. Conclusion: Patient Daniel Cooper. No signs of cardiovascular abnormalities. Health is completely normal. No indications of stroke or heart-related risks. No one spoke. The room fell silent, as if someone had cut the power. Daniel opened his eyes. Frozen. I lifted my head to look around the room. What happened tonight wasn't a heart attack. It wasn't a medical emergency. It was a performance. What? His mother stammered. "I can prove," I continued, "that for the past 4 months, Daniel visited 3 different clinics, under 3 different names, to build a false medical record to pave the way for extracting funds from our joint account. And maybe, to play the victim in a staged divorce." Daniel sat up, face pale. "Evelyn, are you crazy? You're making this up." The storage room door opened. Amy walked in. She didn't say a word. She just stood there, holding her phone, and handed over a printed email with attached photos, the same ones she had sent me. She placed it gently on the table, right in front of his mother. His mother glanced down. In her eyes, something flickered, maybe shock, maybe shame. Her hands trembled. I walked to the head of the table and placed another envelope in front of Daniel. "This is the updated property agreement," I said quietly. "You signed it 3 weeks ago when I said I wanted to revise our estate plan to minimize legal risks. Remember?" Daniel didn't answer. I opened the envelope, pulled out the original document, and carefully flipped to the signed page. Signature, date, witness, notarization. Everything is legally binding. The contract has been active since the moment you signed it. And, because you just faked a medical emergency in front of everyone, including your family, the fraud clause has now been triggered. I closed the folder and slid it toward him. Daniel still said nothing. I turned to the others. You've all thought I was the quiet one, the one who put up with everything. But tonight, I didn't come here to be a victim. I came to bring closure. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Because in their eyes, I could already see it. No one believed Daniel's act anymore. And that was all I needed. Daniel clutched the contract, his fingers gripping so tightly the edges began to crumple. He opened his mouth, trying to speak, but only a shallow, strangled breath came out. This, he stuttered. This isn't legal. I was forced. I'm unwell. She tricked me. His voice rose, teetering on the edge of defense and desperation, but I remained still. The room was silent. The air thickened like solid stone. I could hear Daniel's father breathing hard as he leaned over to wipe his forehead with a napkin. I didn't respond to him right away. I simply opened my purse and took out another small envelope. From it, I pulled a notarized confirmation and a short audio recording that had already been transcribed into a signed witness statement. I handed it to Daniel, then turned to face the room. I didn't just ask a random notary to initial the papers, I said, my voice calm but clear. Maggie was also there that day. All eyes turned toward the door as the sound of soft heels echoed through the hallway. Maggie entered, composed in a charcoal winter coat, her hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck, a folder in hand. She walked into the room with the steady confidence of someone who had long grown accustomed to pressure. Daniel shot up from his chair. Maggie, what are you doing here? Maggie didn't answer him. She looked directly at his parents and spoke. I was present when Daniel signed the new property contract. He was completely lucid, no signs of intoxication, psychological instability, or any form of coercion. I recorded the entire signing session. There's also security footage from the home camera system that Evelyn personally set up. A copy of the video has been sent to her attorney as backup. Daniel opened his mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. His mother lowered her head in silence. His father gripped the armrest of his chair tightly, then turned to me with a look that mixed shock and quiet fatigue. He cleared his throat, his voice smaller than usual, stripped of its typical arrogance. Evelyn, do you need us to get in touch with the family attorney? This is still a private matter. If you need legal support, I can help coordinate. I met his eyes, unwavering. Thank you, I replied sincerely, but I already have everything I need. Documents, witnesses, legal verification, it's all in order. I only need one thing now. He gave a small nod. Go ahead. I'd like your help changing the locks and transferring full ownership of the house into my name, I said, surprisingly calm. Daniel tried to sell the house last year, but all current legal paperwork still lists joint ownership. And under the contract he just signed, if either party violates the asset honesty clause, ownership transfers to the other. Daniel's father turned to his son. Is that true? Daniel didn't answer. His face had gone pale, eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route through the chairs and the stairs, locking him in like a courtroom without a judge. I glanced at Maggie and gave her a signal. She handed me another folder, which I passed to Daniel's father. This is the transfer request for the house deed, including a copy of the contract, notarized signatures, and verification from my attorney. If you're willing to sign as a witness, I'll file this with the notary office right after the holidays. He nodded slowly without another word. He opened the folder, read through the pages, then quietly handed it to his wife. She took it, eyes glassy, but read every word. When she finished, she looked up at me, her voice trembling. Are you angry with us? I shook my head. No. I understand. We all want to believe the best of our own. But sometimes, the truth doesn't come from the place we're most familiar with. By now Daniel had slumped into his chair, hands clasped, shoulders hunched. He no longer looked defiant, just like a man stripped of the illusion that he was still in control. Amy remained in the corner, her gaze fixed on Daniel. She didn't need to say a word. Her presence, along with the evidence now laid bare, had already shattered the last mask Daniel tried to wear. Maggie looked at me and gave a small nod. I returned it with a faint smile, then walked over to the dining table, where my half-finished glass of wine still shimmered red beneath the candlelight. I lifted the glass, my voice steady. This Christmas I don't need gifts. I just want peace. And tonight I think, I finally found it. No one spoke. But I knew the silence no longer held doubt or pity. It was the silence of acknowledgement. I didn't need Daniel to admit he was wrong. I didn't need an apology. The only thing I needed, he had already handed over with that careless signature, thinking he held the upper hand. And now I was the one drawing the final line, not with tears but with the law. And pride. 1 week after Christmas Eve, things unfolded like a chain of dominoes. Daniel could no longer stop. The first news broke on a small legal blog, one that specialized in reporting attorney misconduct and ethics violations. At first, it was just a post quoting internal complaint files, no names mentioned, but enough for anyone familiar with Daniel's past work to connect the dots. By day 3, his name appeared in the local paper. The headline was short but cut like a blade. Former attorney Daniel Cooper accused of falsifying medical records to exploit joint property agreement. The article cited verified contract clauses and mentioned his insurance being terminated due to suspected medical fraud. While he wasn't criminally charged, the damage to his reputation was irreparable. I never contacted Daniel's old law firm. They sent their own letter, formally terminating all professional ties. No longer meets the ethical standards of the profession, it read. I received a copy by mail, along with an email from an old colleague, someone who had been Daniel's friend for over 10 years. He wrote, "I had no idea it had gone this far. I hope you find peace." I didn't reply. Not out of resentment but because there was no reason to hold on to any thread that tied me to the past. I left that house on January 3rd, beneath a pale gray sky wrapped in mist. I didn't bring much. Just a few boxes of books, some framed artwork, the tea set my mother once gave me, and the old oak desk where I had sketched my first interior design drafts back in college. I moved into a small house on the outskirts of town, about a 40-minute drive from downtown. It wasn't big, but it had enough light. Every morning, the fog settled gently over the backyard lawn, sunlight streaming through the curtains in soft golden streaks across the walls, and I felt like I was living in a book I was finally rewriting on my own terms. I opened a small interior design studio in a quiet commercial strip nearby. No flashy signs, no loud ads. Just a hand-carved wooden plaque hanging in the window, inked in dark brown. Evelyn Home Studio. Spaces begin within. My first client was a woman in her 50s, divorced for 2 years, who wanted to remodel her kitchen. She said, "I want a space that makes me feel like I'm worth cooking for just me." I smiled, understanding that feeling more than anyone. 3 weeks later, I called Amy. She picked up after a short ring. Her voice was still soft, steady, like the night she stepped out of that storage room, eyes clear and unshaken. "I'm looking for an assistant," I said without preamble. "Someone with an eye for style, who can organize, work independently. Most importantly, someone who's not afraid to start over." Amy was quiet for a moment. "Are you sure?" "I'm not offering this out of pity," I said. "I'm offering because I see in you something I fought so long to reclaim, courage." The next day she came. Same gray scarf, soft ash-colored boots, and that composed gaze. I showed her around the studio, the desk, the materials corner, the tea nook, and the wooden board on the wall where I liked to write simple quotes to begin the day. That day's quote read, "No design lasts longer than belief in yourself." Amy stepped closer, her finger gently brushing the board's surface. "You wrote this?" "Yeah. I repainted this chalkboard myself last week. I think I'm going to like working here." From that day on, the studio wasn't just where I worked, it was where I relearned how to trust people. Amy never asked me about Daniel. I never asked where she'd gone after everything happened. We both understood that silence was part of healing. Every morning, I made 2 cups of tea. One for me, one for her. We played soft music, picked fabric swatches, sketched out color palettes, helped clients who wanted to turn a quiet corner of their living room into a reading nook or who just needed a new curtain color to mark a fresh start. There were days we barely spoke. We just worked, sometimes catching each other's eyes across the table. And I realized sometimes rebirth doesn't need applause. Just a space safe enough for someone to simply be. I didn't erase Daniel from my memory. I just tucked him into a small corner, where the things that once shattered me now serve as markers for how far I've come. And that studio, bathed in soft light every morning, the gentle scratch of pencil on paper, the warm tea at my side that was proof that I had let go of the past. Not by running from it, but by standing strong in its presence, and rising above it. The next Christmas arrived as softly as a morning breath. No urgent bells, no hollow greetings, no one pretending to be anyone they weren't. That morning I opened the windows earlier than usual, letting the breeze sweep through the little room, bringing in the scent of pine, warm gingerbread from the bakery next door. And the quiet peace of a year I didn't have to survive by telling myself just hold on a little longer. The studio lights came on at 4 in the afternoon. Amy and I hung strings of little golden lights along the glass door frame. We spread a cream linen cloth over the long tea table, arranged pale purple asters and sprigs of pine into glass jars. On the wall, I mounted a new wooden board and wrote in white chalk, "I'm not trying to win. I just stopped losing." Amy paused when she read the line. She turned to me, her gaze gentle, like a silent hand squeeze. "I think this should be printed on coffee mugs," she said quietly. I smiled but didn't answer, just went on hanging the wreath on the door. Maggie was the first to arrive, hair in her usual low bun, wearing her favorite brown leather boots. She brought a box of cheesecake pastries, the kind I used to stretch my student budget to buy at month's end, and a bouquet of lavender wrapped in old newspaper. "Found it at a little shop in the old quarter," Maggie said. "Doesn't smell as strong as fresh ones, but enough to remember." I hugged her. No words needed. Mark Jennings came right after, sharp in a gray V-neck sweater and white shirt underneath, holding a bottle of rare vintage Italian wine. He stepped into the studio the way he might into a courtroom, calm, assured, but his eyes weren't those of a lawyer anymore. They were the eyes of a friend. "I've spent the past year working with women who came forward after your case," he said as we stood by the tea counter. "None of them were Evelyn. But each carried a part of your story. You have no idea the impact you made." I looked at him. "I don't want to be anyone's role model." "You don't have to be. You just have to be real." The first burst of tame laughter echoed when my mother walked in with my sister Lily. They brought a basket of chestnut cookies and a roasted chicken that only my mother could make taste just right. Mom hugged me a little longer than usual, and Lily winked, leaned in and whispered, "You look beautiful tonight. First time in a long time. You look truly happy." I didn't respond. Just squeezed her hand, softly like a promise. The party began just as dusk fell. The golden studio lights cast soft glows on the gray-white walls, reflecting off the glass window panes like scattered stars that had finally found their home. We raised our glasses. Not to victory but to beginnings. Mark stood in the center of the room, lifted his glass high, and said each word with care. "Not everyone gets the chance to rise from the place they were once pushed down." But Evelyn didn't just rise. She rebuilt the ground itself. Maggie followed, her voice lighter but steady. And when Evelyn lit the lights in this daff space, she didn't just brighten it for herself. She lit the way for every woman who once thought they only belonged in the dark. Amy, sitting beside me with her wine glass shimmering in her hand, tilted her head gently and said, "Thank you. For not just forgiving me, but believing in me enough to keep going together." I looked around the room. Every corner, every person, every tiny object was a piece of the journey I had walked. The pine tea table Amy and I assembled ourselves. The bookshelf holding my first redesigned sketches after leaving the city. The old wall clock, once a wedding gift, still ticking, as if unaware of how much had changed. I stepped to the center of the room, where the light fell softest on the wooden floor. No one asked me to speak, but everyone quieted when I lifted my glass. "There was a time," I began, "when I believed that if I could just endure long enough, stay quiet long enough, love would come back." I paused for a moment, letting for a moment the wind brush past the window. But I was wrong. Love isn't a reward for silence. It only lives where there is light. And I lived far too long in the shadows someone else built. I looked around, stopping briefly at my mother's eyes, still moist, still strong like the day she first taught me to get back up after a scraped knee. Now I light the way for myself. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. Because that night, I no longer needed anyone to rescue me from sorrow. I had opened the door myself, stepped out on my own, and rebuilt my life from the ruins using my own two hands. In the studio's warm, quiet glow, amid soft laughter, the scent of fresh pastries, and Christmas music just loud enough to keep the heart company, I knew this was peace. Not the kind given by someone else. The kind I claimed for myself, through my own resilience. If you've stayed with me this far, maybe somewhere in this story, you saw a part of yourself too, whether in the hurt, the quiet endurance, or in the brave steps it takes to walk away from someone else's darkness. I didn't share this story for sympathy. I shared it to remind someone that no matter where you are in your journey, the light is still real. Not everyone gets the chance to start over. But if you do take it, stand up. Light the way for yourself. What did this story mean to you? If you ever had to choose between silence and stepping out, what would you choose? I'd love to hear your thoughts about courage, about trust, about how we all slowly learn to love ourselves again. And if what I've shared today resonated with you, feel free to follow this channel for more stories about family, healing, betrayal, and the quiet strength it takes to rebuild from the inside out. Thank you for being here with me. I'll see you in the next story.